Like, who has been the most exciting person for you tonight?
Oh my God.
Besides me.
Took the words out of my mouth. Besides, I'm a narcissist.
Ever seen someone get handed a once-in-a-lifetime shot and somehow flip it into a full-blown disaster? Yeah, that's exactly what went down here. Rachel Zegler didn't just stumble with Disney's biggest remake. This turned into something way bigger than a simple misstep. We're talking about a project with a $170 million price tag, a level where studios expect magic, not chaos. Instead, things spiraled so badly that Disney executives were reportedly flying across the country just to ask her to slow down on social media. That's not normal. That's panic mode. This movie had a budget sitting right next to giants like Guardians of the Galaxy and Beauty and the Beast, yet somehow it crashed harder than anyone expected. What was supposed to be a crown jewel ended up labeled as one of Disney's biggest live-action failures ever. And people didn't forget the build-up either. Comments about the original Snow White, calling the classic story outdated, mixing in strong opinions online right under the film's own promo, it all stacked up fast. Then came the shock when the internet pushed back just as loudly. Now the numbers are out, and they're impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a flop. It turned into one of the most talked about box office collapses in recent memory. So what actually happened behind the scenes? And how did things go this far off track for both Rachel Zegler and Disney? This wasn't just about one movie going wrong. It's what happens when confidence goes unchecked with a massive Hollywood budget behind it. Everything started when Rachel Zegler was personally chosen by Steven Spielberg to star in West Side Story, a huge cosign that instantly put her on the map. By 2021, she was landing roles in major franchises like Hunger Games and even stepping into the DC space, which basically meant she had the industry wide open in front of her. Opportunities like that don't come often. She was moving fast and climbing even faster. Then came the big one. Disney cast her as Snow White in a live-action remake of one of their most iconic films ever made. This was the kind of role that can define a career, or completely flip it upside down. But instead of keeping things smooth during press, the tone shifted in a way people didn't expect. Interview after interview, she openly criticized the original 1937 film, the same movie that built Disney into what it is today. She described it as outdated, questioned the story, and even labeled the prince as a stalker, while saying the romance felt off. At one point, she even laughed about how they weren't doing that this time because it was weird. That moment stuck with people, and not in a good way. Look, anyone can have opinions about older movies. That's normal. But when you're leading a remake built on nostalgia, going on a press tour and tearing down the original just doesn't land right. It's like stepping into a role and then publicly questioning the very thing people loved in the first place. Think of it like this. Imagine getting hired to run a taco spot. And on day one, you start telling customers tacos aren't even good. That kind of energy doesn't build trust. It pushes people away fast. And it didn't stop at just comments about the film. The entire promo run started shifting into something else. When the first trailer dropped, instead of keeping the focus on the movie, Rachel shared her personal political views prama under the trailer post. That instantly changed the conversation, and not in a way that helped the film. A lot of people felt like a family movie rollout wasn't the place for that kind of messaging. Behind the scenes, things reportedly got tense enough that Disney executives had to step in directly, asking for certain posts to be taken down. They even brought in social media guidance to try and keep things from escalating further. But from her perspective, it seemed like she believed she was standing for something bigger. The problem is, while that might feel important personally, it was clashing hard with what the movie needed to succeed at the box office. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't a small project. A film like this needs massive global support just to break even. And when parts of the audience feel pushed away before release, that creates real risk. Disney saw the warning signs early. Reshoots started rolling in to adjust key parts of the story. They even reworked elements of the romance after test audiences responded negatively to its absence. By the time everything wrapped, the budget had climbed to around $336 million, sitting above films like Guardians of the Galaxy, Rogue One, and even the live-action Beauty and the Beast, which crossed the billion mark back in 2017. And here's where it really hits. All that money was riding on a film already weighed down by nonstop controversy before it even reached theaters. By the time Snow White finally dropped in March 2025, the situation wasn't just bad, it was brutal. Opening weekend told the whole story. The film brought in only $42 million domestically, even lower than Disney's already reduced expectations. Overseas didn't save it either, with about $118 million internationally. And after just 4.5 weeks, it was basically out of theaters, closing with around $205 million worldwide. Now, at first glance, $200 million might sound solid. But here's the part most people don't think about. When you buy a movie ticket, theaters take a big cut, often close to half. So that $205 million quickly shrinks down to roughly $102 million actually going back to Disney. And when your production costs are sitting around $271 million, even after tax breaks, those numbers don't just hurt, they collapse the entire business model. The final estimates made it clear. Disney reportedly lost around $170 million on this one project alone. At that point, people started saying the quiet part out loud. Some joked it would have been less painful to scrap the whole thing early rather than deal with the fallout that followed. Because this wasn't just a financial miss, it turned into a full-on public spectacle. Online reactions exploded instantly. Forums lit up with people connecting the dots, pointing back to all the interviews, all the statements, and everything that built up to this moment. The conversation wasn't just about the movie anymore. It became about image, decisions, and consequences. And on platforms like Twitter, the backlash came in fast and loud, with reactions piling on from every direction. The internet didn't waste a second. People started posting side-by-side clips. Rachel's confident interviews from 2022 right next to headlines about the box office collapse. Captions like, "Congratulations, you played yourself," were everywhere. And the contrast was impossible to ignore. Even Disney seemed to quietly step back from the whole situation. Normally, every live-action princess gets the full theme park treatment. Meet and greets, photo ops, the whole rollout. But this time, nothing. No live-action Snow White character, no big push, just silence, which says a lot. To put it in perspective, you can meet both versions of Ariel at Disney parks right now. But Snow White? Completely missing. It felt like Disney just wanted to move on as fast as possible and leave this chapter behind. And then came the merch situation. Reports started circulating about unsold products getting heavily discounted at stores like Dollar Tree and Five Below. That's usually not where major Disney releases are expected to end up, and people definitely noticed. But the most surprising part? The response afterward. Instead of stepping back or shifting tone, Rachel kept speaking out. In interviews, she suggested the criticism was tied to how she was being perceived and treated, pointing to broader industry issues. She also appeared in major features, continuing to share strong opinions about how actors should approach public topics. At one point, she described criticism as something that doesn't affect her, like water off a duck's back. But to a lot of people watching this unfold, that approach raised even more questions, especially considering everything that had already happened. Now moving into 2026, she's working on a smaller indie comedy project titled She Gets It From Me. It's a very different lane compared to the massive franchises she was part of before, and naturally, people are watching closely to see what happens next. She's also stepped into theater, performing in London's West End. That's solid work, no doubt, but it's a very different path compared to the blockbuster trajectory she was on just a few years ago. The shift is noticeable, and people are paying attention. There were also headlines about her potentially playing Gloria Estefan in a biopic. Sounds big at first, but here's the catch. That project isn't fully developed. No confirmed script, no secured funding, and no clear production timeline. At this point, it's more of a possibility than an actual movie. So naturally, some started questioning how real that opportunity is. To them, it feels more like industry buzz than something guaranteed. A way to keep her name circulating while things settle down. Because in Hollywood, reputation matters fast. When reports come out about tension behind the scenes, when a project tied to your name takes a major financial hit, and when public perception shifts this hard, studios start moving differently. That doesn't mean doors slam shut forever, but landing major roles becomes a lot more complicated, especially when big-budget projects are on the line. And here's the part that stands out the most. A lot of this situation didn't have to go this way. If the promotion had stayed focused, if messaging was tighter during release, if things were handled with a bit more control, the outcome could have looked very different. Maybe the film still wouldn't have dominated the box office. That's always a risk. But it likely wouldn't have turned into such a widely talked about setback either. Not realistically, this probably wouldn't have turned into a $170 million loss. And her career? It likely would have stayed on a much stronger track. But instead, the approach shifted in a way that kept pulling attention away from the film itself. There was a constant mix of strong opinions, bold statements, and moments that didn't always line up with the timing of a major family movie release. On top of that, criticizing the original story, the same one tied directly to the project's success, made things even more complicated. And somewhere in all of this, it started to feel like controversy was being treated as impact, like being loud automatically meant being right. But the reality is, audiences don't respond to that the way people think they do. Most families just want to sit down and enjoy a familiar story. They're not looking for extra noise around it. And from a business side, studios are focused on results, not headlines that create division before opening weekend. So where does that leave things now? At the moment, her path in Hollywood looks a lot different than it did before. There's still work happening, indie films, theater, smaller projects, and that can still be a solid lane. But those massive franchise opportunities and that fast rise to the top tier, that momentum has clearly slowed down. What makes this stand out even more is how avoidable it all feels. A more controlled rollout, a more focused message, a little more awareness during key moments. And this story could have played out very differently. Meanwhile, the industry itself doesn't seem to be slowing down. Disney is still pushing forward with more live-action remakes like Moana and Tangled, so the same formula is still in motion, even after a setback like this. Some adjustments are noticeable, sure, but at its core, the strategy hasn't really changed. The bigger question is whether lessons are actually being learned, or if this is just being brushed off as a one-time situation. Now it really comes down to perspective. Was this outcome deserved based on everything that happened? Or was it a mix of timing, expectations, and how fast online reactions can spiral? If you want more stories like this, the ones they don't really want you to look too closely at, hit subscribe, because it's just the beginning, and it only gets more wild from here.